Sweet fields arrayed in living green, and rivers of delight. We will rest in the fair and happy land by and by, just across on the evergreen shore. Sing the song of Moses and the Lamb by and by, and dwell with Jesus evermore. Filled with delight, my raptured soul would here no longer stay. Though Jordan's waves around me roll, fearless I'd launch away. We will rest in the fair and happy land by and by, just across on the evergreen shore. Sing the song of Moses and the Lamb by and dwell with Jesus evermore. If y'all now mark your books, number 934. 934.
Thanks, Greg. Well, like after worship today, this morning, that there was a good group going out to the Alaneses, and hope that, I guess they're in a devotional about right now, and pray that that's going well. Back in school, when I took preacher's math, I know that we're supposed to count those along with our number tonight, and anybody who's online or who would view this later, we can count all those in as being in attendance tonight. We're going to be tonight primarily in Revelation chapter 2. We're going to kind of intro back into where we were before we kind of took a break for a while and just touch on some other subjects. But looking at that idea of Christian ethics, probably a little over a month or a month and a half, maybe even, we looked at moving off of Ephesians chapter 4 and 5, and looking at how do we view the ethical situations that we have in this world today, and how are they impacting the church. And we spent some time looking at and examining critical race theory and in race relations and those types of things, and how those have impacted the church through things like liberation theology. And so we're going to kind of ease back into it, and not just jump all the way into the deep end yet. But we will be there next week. But today I would like to talk about a word that I think is kind of a little bit of a trigger word to some people, and we might have differing opinions on what it means. But that word is tolerance. What does tolerance mean? How do we define tolerance?
Putting up with.
Putting up with, okay. Any other definitions? That's probably the East Texas definition right there. Yeah. Any other definitions for tolerance?
I guess it's just acceptance of
Okay.
difference of thought.
Okay.
Like that.
Yeah, and so then there's this confusion sometimes too, though, between tolerance and acceptance. I think that's where our world really begins to struggle and to muddy the water. So what would be the difference between tolerance and acceptance?
I mean, tolerance, and the engineer over there can chime in on this, but you talk about tolerance as this is a margin that we can work with this margin, but we get outside this margin, we can't work with that. It's outside of the tolerances, right?
Yeah.
And I think we've lost that sense in our society. Tolerance, from a societal standpoint, I mean, there's no limit to it. You just have to put up with whatever anybody else throws you, instead of realizing, okay, no, there's a margin here where, okay, we can live with this, but to the point at which we're outside the margin of what can be be tolerant.
That's a good point. I hope to touch on that, to expand on that a little bit later. Any other thoughts? Tolerance and acceptance, and that blurred line that's between those two. All right, yeah, and kind of as Kurt was saying, there is this idea of with tolerance, there's a point that we tolerate to. It doesn't mean that tolerance means we go all the way with everything and accept everything. And so there's a difference there in what tolerance means. And even sometimes tolerance could be we will tolerate it in this realm, but we won't tolerate it in another realm as well. Meaning, and by that meaning, what situation you find yourself in, or even what the setting is, and how we can define tolerance.
And tolerance has a negative connotation to it. Tolerate kind of carries for us a negative connotation, whereas accept carries a positive connotation.
Well, even I think people, we changing the definition of tolerance even beyond acceptance to endorsement.
Yeah, that is true. That is true, and we'll discuss that a little bit too. How we could be pressured into not only tolerating, but to endorse something that we might be uncomfortable with. So today, what I'd like to do, though, to kind of introduce this thought, is look at the church in Thyatira, starting really verse 19. We kind of have an intro to it in verse 18 of Revelation chapter 2, and then we'll kind of move through this chapter. Thyatira was probably the smallest and maybe least important town mentioned in Revelation 2 and 3 when you see those that are listed. But where is it positioned in this list? Where do we see it positioned out of how many churches were there in Revelation 2? There's 7. So where does it find itself? Right in the middle. And that could or could not have some significance to it. Sometimes there's a reason and an order to this positioning. If you look at the way that these are kind of arranged, what we have is churches 1 and 7 kind of being on the fringes as in a bad position, and then 2 and 6 are maybe a little bit better, and then we kind of have a mix here in the middle. And Thyatira is right there in the center of it all, and I believe it's the one with maybe the most written about it, and perhaps maybe this is arranged here in the middle to be kind of a central thought of what churches in this time could have been struggling with. May or may not be that way, but something to maybe consider as we move through this text today. We know starting in verse 19, who is it that is speaking to this church? Give the easy church answer. Yeah, okay. So Son of God, it's Jesus that's speaking to the church. And then we can see on several occasions where he says, I know, like verse 19, I know your works. Verse 20, I have this against you. Verse 23, I am he who searches mind and heart. Verse 25, until I come. So we have these I statements, and he is saying some things about himself to them. As we look at verse 19, what we come across first is the praise given to the church. And so before we get into this idea of what kinds of sin they are tolerating in the church, Jesus opens to this church with some praise to them. And so verse 19 says, I know your works, your love and faith and service and patience and endurance, and that your latter works exceed the first. And so what is the praise to them? What is the praise that he gives to them? They're what?
They're improving.
They're improving, yes. And what areas are they improving in? Okay, love and faith, yeah, and this idea of love, faith, these good works, and they are improving in them. So he's saying that the latter then exceeds the first. If we think back to and maybe I guess we weren't studying here, but Kurt went through these in his class recently. If we look at the letter to Ephesus, what was the deal with Ephesus? It was the opposite, yeah. And exactly, they had lost their first love, and so what we're gonna almost see here is a flip. So if you want to see the other side of the ditch, you can go and look at the church in Ephesus, because we almost see a flip here where Ephesus is really strong, probably on doctrinal type issues, and knowing what's truth, and they have grown weak on the idea of love. And showing that love and expressing that love and doing the good works, and so I think there's something to look at here as a progression that can happen, a danger that can happen with good works, and also a challenge here within are we doing the good work? So we have to think to ourselves, do our latter works exceed our previous, the works that we do at first? And just kind of think about yourself as a Christian. Think about this church. I mean, I would venture to say that there's some areas where we need to be more active. We need to even be out in the community more in areas, and we need to work on those so that we can look and that we can see that our latter works exceed the first. But before we let's look at another thing of praise here, because what we're gonna see, and what's kind of where our focus will be, is there is this tolerance in some of these middle verses here that we'll examine closely as we move in, and that tolerance is some false teachings that have come in, which he refers to. They come in through Jezebel, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. But in verses 24 and 25, there's even a praise here to those who seem to be doing the good works. And in verses 24 and 25, even though the leadership has kind of gone away and gone astray to things of the world, it says, but to the rest of you in Thyatira who do not hold this teaching. And I think that what we have is a leadership that has led the church in a wrong direction. And he says, but to the rest of you who are in Thyatira who do not hold this teaching, who have not learned what some call the deep things of Satan, to you I say, I do not lay on you any other burden. Only hold fast what you have until I come. And so what is Jesus saying here to those other individuals? What's the situation that we have?
They're okay, but don't become like the others.
Yeah. So can you picture the situation, how difficult it must be to be those, to even be here within a church, and you see the church drifting and going away, but you are to hold firm. And I think we can see this idea of a collective body, but then also our individual responsibility. That even if I come up here and preach something, you have an individual responsibility to the truth. Or if one of the elders comes up here and says something, you still have an individual responsibility to hold firm to the truth. And I think that's important as we begin to move into how they've gone away. Any thoughts or comments so far here? Okay, so what we have is we have a church that is kind of fading on taking a stance on what is right and wrong, but they're exceeding in what area? What area are they exceeding in?
Love and faith.
Love and faith. Okay, so I want to bring this question up, and I don't know if we can really find an answer to it. But does it seem that sometimes the churches that are maybe more liberal with their doctrine, perhaps maybe are a little, I don't know if better is the word, but they're at least more out there as far as showing good works in the community? Why do you think that is? And then why do you think you then have a church like Ephesus that could that kind of has closed itself in, but doctrinally they have some sound teaching? Any thoughts or comments there on that?
I think that's out of acceptance. They
Okay.
accept the one.
Okay.
They're gonna try whatever.
Yeah.
They're gonna accept everybody else's whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, and some of the things that you can do in those areas are not bad things as long as you keep the right doctrine and focus. That there is a balance between reaching out and holding the doctrine that is true and staying true to not accepting them. So if we want to reach a certain group of people, when you look at the communities that we are in, and you go even broader to some of the big cities around here, and you see what's going on. If you want to reach some of those people, that's a good thing. But when you then say, in order to reach them, we're gonna sacrifice these teachings, that's where the trouble comes in.
I think that's the whole thing about you love the people and you accept the people, but not necessarily the behavior.
Yeah.
Or their beliefs or thoughts or whatever.
Yeah, and that's where that idea of tolerance and endorsement and acceptance, that's where things begin to get maybe a little bit murky, and we've seen churches sacrifice a little bit to say, well, because we're going to reach, we got to sacrifice this in order to reach, and that's the greater good.
And society's just, that's where society has gone. When you stop tolerating me, you must not love me anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I think Matthew will attest to the fact that I love him deeply, but there's some things that I wouldn't tolerate.
Yeah.
Just because I'm not going to tolerate a certain behavior doesn't mean I don't love you. In fact, it means I do love you.
Yeah.
I think part of it also is that why do some congregations, or why do we see those tend to do that?
Yeah.
It's just human personalities, that people that tend to be more emotional and more feeling connected are less analytical.
Yeah.
And the opposite would be true. And I think when you get the leadership going that way, you tend to lean one way. I think it's just a human condition.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're right, and that's why I believe it's important that you have a leadership that balances each other well, because you could go. You've been to maybe some of those churches that are too far one way, to where you go in and they don't even want to welcome you because they think, okay, we got it right here, we're good, we don't need anything else. And then
I don't want you in here messing up our mojo.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have the other side, which says, anybody can come in, anybody can be a part of this group, and you don't really have to change anything. We're glad you're here. We're glad you're here, and we can get maybe lost too in that. We're just glad you're here, and not really require anything of people that Scripture requires. So let's so we don't waste too much time here. Let's begin to move in to what Jesus is calling them out on, because they are compromising. They are compromising their beliefs in order to try to maybe grow in this love. And Jesus attempts to correct them by trying to bring them back to the proper understanding. And so if we want to examine verses 20 through 23, it says, "But I have this against you." So he gave them this praise, and then he says, "But I have this against you, that you tolerate the woman Jezebel." So we'll come back to that in just a second. "Who calls herself a prophetess, and is teaching and seducing my servants to practice what kinds of things? Verse 20. Sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols. Okay, so we'll discuss that as well. I gave her time to repent, but she refuses to repent of her sexual immorality. Behold, I will throw her onto a sick bed, and those who commit adultery with her I will throw into great tribulation, unless they repent of their works. And I will strike her children dead, and all the churches will know that I am He who searches mind and heart, and I will give each of you according to your works. And so in this section here, we have kind of two pieces. He gives the accusation of what they have done, and then he gives the judgment of what's going to happen as they continue to go down this route. So the accusation comes in verse 20, and the accusation is they have been tolerant to that woman, and who is that? Jezebel. Okay, so remember, where are we at here? What book are we in? Revelation. So what do you think about this Jezebel? What's meant by Jezebel?
It's a good chance that it's not an actual person, but maybe even a group of false teachers.
Yeah.
May even be referring to the Jezebel of the Old Testament that was evil and led people astray.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Any other thought?
Referring in general to whatever temple cult or cults are around there that where the prostitution and the meat sacrifice to idols and all that kind of comes together.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, referring back to Jezebel from Kings.
Yeah. Yeah. Any other thoughts with Jezebel? Here's what I believe, and it's along some of the same lines that what y'all mentioned. I believe that when he talks about Jezebel and tolerating Jezebel, we'll come back to this idea, I guess, of what is meant by tolerance. But he uses Jezebel, I think, is something that is symbolic. Could it be men, women, whatever? But it is symbolic. He uses a woman here. There could be some reason for picking out a woman character like this, but he uses Jezebel, and we see Jezebel, and I think he's referring to people like the Jezebel in the Old Testament in 1st and 2nd Kings. So we see Jezebel, who Ahab took as a wife, and he did evil. And by taking the wife named Jezebel from the king of the Sidonians in 1 Kings 16, it was a marriage of compromise. She worshipped the false god Baal, and Ahab married her, and soon he worshipped as well. You might remember she killed God's prophets. And she also threatened to kill Elijah, and so we have her doing that. But in First Kings 21:25, it says that she incited Ahab to do evil, and I think that's kind of a key to me about what Jezebel is like. She grabbed Ahab, the king, the leader of the people. She incited him to do evil. She brought him away. And so we have the tolerance of things here, and there were two things that we mentioned that they were tolerating. What were those two things again? Yeah, sexual immorality and food that was offered to idols. Was that it? Yeah, sexual immorality, and you eat food sacrificed to idols. So the sexual immorality, what and this food to idols. Why these two things are what they were giving into? Why do you think it's these two things that were mentioned? please the senses. What was the rest of the world around them doing? These two things, right? So it represented the culture around them and what the culture was doing. We see it time and time again. These two things come up in this time period and other time periods that are close by, as far as practicing sexual immorality and eating food sacrificed to idols. We see this mentioned later on in Revelation. Remember in Acts 15. Acts 15, we have the Jerusalem Council, right? And what was the Jerusalem Council? Why did they meet together? They were discussing what? Do the Jews need to, or do the Gentiles need to do what?
Gentiles need to keep the law, and if so, how much of it?
Yeah, okay, yeah. Do the Gentiles need to keep the law, and if so, how much of it? And what was their conclusion on that? What was their conclusion? Do we as Gentiles need to keep the law today? Okay, no. Okay, yeah. So ultimately the conclusion was that they don't need to do that. But they did find it fitting at the end of that to make sure that they knew that they should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols and from what has been strangled, and to keep from sexual immorality. Why? Because in the Gentile world, that's what people did. And so likewise in our world, it's important for us to be aware and to abstain from things that our culture is doing, and not to become like them in tolerance, for the sake of tolerance, and then give into them so that we can be accepted by them, and that we can then accept their acts as well. So I think we can begin to see this idea of tolerating and how it creeps in. So, sexual immorality, right? And we're going to discuss this more next week. Do we have sexual immorality in our culture? Okay, yes, we do. Okay, so where does the tolerance, where does it begin? Where can we make mistakes? And where have mistakes started even that led to more and more sexual morality coming in?
You know, like starting in our homes where we let
Okay, yeah. And I was thinking more about the church, but you're right. Yeah, it does creep into our homes, and we're not defending our homes. And I wasn't even thinking about going that route, but absolutely, yes, we let it creep into our homes in many ways, and that's part of the moral decay, because we're participating in these things when we're not meeting together. Yeah. Think about marriage, sex before marriage. You know, we're dealing with some things now that are real extreme, but there's been some times where we've kind of accepted what was not right. Oh yeah, these people, they live together, but we can't call them out on it, because we got to be, we got to be somewhat tolerant. And then what happens with the next generation? They see that as endorsement, and then they take on the next thing, right? And so the next thing in our culture might be homosexuality. The next thing in our culture, as things are going, transgender. All of this that we'll discuss in more detail next week, but you can see how becoming close to the world is saying, well, we got to be tolerant of people. We don't want to come across as unloving. What kind of a path it can lead a church down? Any thoughts or comments on that? All right. So the sexual immorality, I think, is pretty evident to us when we consider the reality in these ripples of sexual immorality, and kind of get into some things that Bev said. Even in our homes, pornography. How does that enter into one's thought process and one's idea of being accepted? It starts even with some smaller, what we would maybe consider not pornography today, but might have been considered pornography not too long ago. And that kind of ripples through, and we can see how that goes and expands and builds. And we end up looking very much just like the world. But what about this food sacrificed to idols? Any of y'all having that struggle right now of eating food sacrificed to idols? Yeah. I have a problem with just eating a lot of food in general, but not necessarily that sacrifice to idols. What would that mean to them if they said, I'm going to abstain in this culture from food sacrificed to idols? What would that look like to them?
There would be almost no meat in their diet.
Okay. Which would be very difficult for somebody like me. What else? Would they have any?
They have no social life.
Yeah. Okay. So they're having some social impact. Could they have some kind of economic impact as well on themselves? Perhaps. I mean, isn't that how they kind of got together and they would, even doing business and things like that, there would be the food that was sacrificed to idols politically, those types of things? Other thoughts on that?
Well, Paul talked about the fact that meat's meat, and there's no such thing as an idol.
Yeah.
So in reality, it doesn't matter. But in this case, it seems to be that they're bringing things in as religious service.
Yeah.
And that the immorality and the food sacrificed to idols are part of a false doctrine that's permeating this church.
Yeah. And so you're talking about like 1 Corinthians 10, Revelation 14, and I think what Paul is saying is just that. Meat is meat. If we buy meat at the market, we can't necessarily always examine what exactly it's doing. But when it comes to be part of a participation with something, not just that we're eating meat, then it's crossed a line, and you would have to believe that's what's going on here, or else we'd have a kind of a major contradiction there. But
well, it also seems that they weren't doing these things, and someone's influencing them and teaching them.
Yeah.
To adopt these practices.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. The Jezebels or Jezebel, who, if it's one or more people, it seems like it's probably maybe some multiple people would be what I would lean to, are coming in and teaching these things, and they're promoting this, and so what it would look like maybe for us even as a church is hey, if we want to be accepted, and we could really run into these things here soon, like if we want to be able to continue to broadcast our stuff on YouTube, we gotta cut out some of what we say or change that message a little bit. We gotta become more accepting, or we have to buy into something in our business in order to make the dollar. And I think what he's saying is as Christians and living righteously, and if we want to live righteously, we're gonna look not normal to our society, but we will look strange. As strange as our society is, the norms are changing. And our righteousness will look more and more strange to the society. And are we willing to accept that? Or are we just going to continue to always be polite to these things so that we can say, we're tolerant? And so what Jesus is saying here is there's a place for your tolerance to end. That you need to be intolerant of some things. That you have to have some principles to stand on and to say, no, we won't do that. Now, Now, with this tolerance, there is that balance that Kurt was mentioning earlier. Are there things that we can be tolerant to in day-to-day cultural life, but that doesn't mean we accept them as a church? We have a society, right? Cities, counties, states, country, that will accept and not accept certain things. For instance, freedom of religion, right? Freedom of religion. You think that might be a good thing for a society to have? That they have some choices and some true freedoms of religion. And I believe that, as long as there's not great evils going on because of it, and we can see some of those carried out in some of these religions, but as long as there's not these great evils going on because of it, we can accept a society as freedom of religion. But that doesn't mean that in our circle of our brotherhood here, that, oh yeah, you can carry all that in here and then still be okay. You can carry all those beliefs in, and that's tolerated here. And so we can see that there's different areas where we can tolerate and we can get along and we can be in this world, but we as Christians are not of this world. And so who we are as Christians, our tolerance of that in that realm is different. Any thoughts, comments, distinctions on that? Okay. So what we see here at the end, though, is that Jesus does he provides some judgment on the church of Thyatira, especially the Jezebel and those who would fall under that, because as we mentioned already in verses 24 and 25, we see kind of this distinction of those who are still holding true that Jesus is saying, just hold true, hold on to it, and that's an important message for us. But we see in verse 21 this justice that's coming to them, and first what we notice in verse 21 is what did Jesus give them at the beginning? What did he give Jezebel at the beginning of verse 21?
Time to repent.
Time to repent. Yeah. So this is a justice that's coming with patience, and we need to remember that as well. That we can't just tell people you understand this today, you accept all of this today, or you get out of here. That there needs to be some teaching, but there does need to be a time of saying, okay, if you haven't changed, if you don't repent, then we need to make a distinction. And so Jesus does that as well. And he says to those who don't, what's going to happen to them? He'll throw her onto a what? Sick bed. I find this kind of interesting, and maybe I'm seeing too much into it. But this idea of a sick bed, who's he throwing onto the sick bed? Those who are practicing what? Sexual morality. Yeah, and maybe there's something to it, maybe there's not. But I kind of see this idea similar to an Esther. What was it that Haman built? He built the gallows, right? And that's what he was going to do his sinful act with, right? He was going to hang people on the gallows, and he ended up being the one on that. And just like this is the sexual morality takes place, in the bed, and that's where he's going to throw them onto this sick bed. And I could be maybe reading too much into that, but that's what came to my mind as I was going through this and thought on it for a while. And so there's that's coming to them, but then Jesus gives promises to those who do hold true. And those two promises come to us in verses 26 and 27. I'll just wrap up this real quick. That he will give them authority over all the nations. This is similar to those who persevere in some of these other churches as well. What he gives them, especially the church in Laodicea, that I will grant him to sit with me on my throne. So he gives them this position of power. And then he will give them the morning star. And I guess I could go into a little bit of what the morning star probably was, but that might be neither here nor there, because ultimately, in the end of the book, in Revelation 22:16, when he refers to the morning star, the bright morning star that's descended from the root of David, he's talking about himself. And I think what Jesus says is part of the reward for those who hold true is himself, Jesus. And so I think it's important that we hold true, that we understand what it means to tolerate, what it means to be in this world and to live in this world and to reach out, that we need to be a loving congregation, that we need to reach out into our community, but not at the sacrifice of truth and acceptance and tolerating the Jezebel. Perhaps tonight there's something that you need prayers for, that you need to bring before the congregation. We want to offer you that opportunity as we stand and sing this song.
Softly